Welcome, everyone, to the next installment of the Back Porch Banters. Doing this one virtually, I am honored to have Bob Lord, Senior Vice President of Tax Policy for the Patriotic Millionaires. He knows a lot more than I do about tax policy, and he is going to help me finish the process of crafting tax policy proposals which will allow the middle class not only to survive, but to thrive. Thank you, Bob. Appreciate you coming in today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. And we talked earlier, we talked about some ideas of what specific cuts can we make. I mean, I think we both agree that there are a lot of loopholes designed for millionaires by millionaires that are hurting the middle class. And the example I give is 2019, I paid an 8% federal tax rate because I have a really good accountant and he used a lot of the millionaire and billionaire tax cuts, even at my income class, to hide legally a lot of my income. What I would like to do is aggressively cut down some of these tax changes. And I would also like to repeal the 2017 Trump tax bracket cuts. But it sounds like we don't necessarily need to do that, that we might be able to just close loopholes to achieve the goal of ourselves and of Patriotic Millionaires of reducing taxes entirely for people who are at or below the poverty line. To where if you're only making 40 grand or so a year, you shouldn't also be paying taxes. There's barely enough money to live on.
Well, absolutely, Chris. We should not be taxing people into poverty. Their federal income tax should not be driving them into poverty. So someone making 40 grand a year, just enough to pay their basic living expenses, there's a moral imperative there that we not tax them anymore. And apologies for the dogs in the background. There's nothing I can do about it.
No worries. I'm about to have some too. Mine will be chiming in about 15 minutes here when they get here. So yeah,
Okay.
we're in good company there.
Okay. Um, and it's not going to be it wouldn't be terribly difficult to raise taxes on the rich to offset the revenue cost of providing that income tax exemption. But really, if we're going to get at the core problem of wealth at the top accumulating much faster than it is for the rest of us, causing a larger and larger amount of our wealth to be concentrated in the richest members of society. Look, we have the top 19 families in America. That's the top 10 millionth of the population, or
Wow.
in percentages, the top 0.00001%. Those folks, just 19 families, are sitting on nearly $3 trillion of wealth.
Wow.
Over 150 billion on average for those 19.
That is insane.
And here's how that happens tax-wise. Jeff Bezos is worth over $200 billion. Now, I think he's right around 240 billion. Most of that wealth is in Amazon stock. For every dollar that he invested in Amazon stock in the mid 1990s, 1994 to 1997, in that time frame, this before Amazon became a publicly traded corporation. For every dollar Jeff Bezos invested in Amazon, he has $1 million of wealth. It's an incredible return. That's 57% return per year, every year. So, in other words, after the first year, his wealth is 157% of what it was at the beginning of the year. Then at the next year, at the end of the next year, it's 157% of that, and so on, all the way up to
compounding exponentially to this ludicrous amount of wealth.
And there's been no tax paid on that. We can't. And so even let's say he paid tax on all of it tomorrow. He sold all the Amazon stock tomorrow. He'd still be worth over $150 billion. It's still an obscene amount of wealth. We have to start taxing gains, investment gains, as they occur, not waiting until some billionaire sells an asset 30 or 40 years later. Because what I just said about Jeff Bezos also applies for Warren Buffett, also applies for Bill Gates, for Steve Ballmer, for the Google guys, all of them.
Yeah, and that absolutely makes sense. And so I guess the nitty gritty with that is, where do we draw those lines? Like, we don't want to have, for example, Joe family guy who's got a rental house. Do we necessarily want him having to do the extra extra paperwork of re-estimating the value of that rental house every year and paying taxes on that? Or do we develop some number where, oh, if you own a certain number of houses or a certain amount of assets, that then you have to start paying that in real time?
There's ways to do it. The way I
Uh-huh.
like best is to have an exemption, a lifetime exemption per person.
Oh, okay.
And it could be very generous. It could be like $50 million per person. Where up to $50 million of gain, you can
Uh-huh.
wait until you sell the asset, till you
Okay.
sell the investment, and pay
Uh-huh.
tax at whatever the applicable rate is. But
Okay.
above that, you either pay it every year or you pay a higher and higher rate for how,
Okay.
depending on how long you hold that investment.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. And I'm actually going to take some notes while we go here because I'm picking up some good things.
And Chris, if we don't fix that problem, fixing everything else won't get us there. That's what's fundamentally
Wow.
wrong
It's that big. That
with
one thing is that big. That's good though, because that's really what I want with this conversation, with this process. I want to be able to offer a major change that is revolutionary that will change the face of taxation without it being so complicated that everyday voters are going to look at it and just scratch their heads and say, I have no idea what that guy's talking about. I'm not voting for him.
And by the way, if you think about what these guys like Jeff Bezos and
Yeah.
Warren Buffett and what they're doing, they're not engaging in some type of aggressive tax avoidance maneuvering.
Right.
Just acting
It's pretty
rationally.
simple.
They're
Yeah. It's a
they're
simple.
holding stock in these companies that they're involved in, that they
Hmm.
believe in, that they think are going
Hmm.
to be appreciating,
Right.
and they're selling stock probably when necessary for whatever spending they want to do.
Uh
But
huh.
that's a tiny slice of the stock they own.
Yeah.
So they're not doing anything crazy. It's just the way the system is built,
Yeah.
it's naturally rigged in their favor.
It is very rigged in their favor. It's also heavily rigged, I believe, in favor of real estate developers and investors. And that's where a lot of my loopholes are. And I'd like to look at some of those as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a couple of them, which I'm sure you're familiar.
Yeah.
One is the idea that depreciation deductions can
Hmm.
arbitrarily be claimed and reduce someone's income, even
Yes.
though the real estate on which that depreciation deduction is based is actually getting higher. It's
Gaining
gaining
value.
value,
Yes.
but
That to me is
they're
ridiculous.
deducting the
Hmm.
depreciation. They're
And
taking
that's one of my major deductions. It's one of the major reasons why I pay diddly squat for taxes.
but what the one that may be bigger, I think, is
Uh-huh.
something called the like kind exchange rules, where it really they really aren't like kind exchanges. Basically, the way it works is I have a building
Hmm.
and I paid $1 million for it, and now it's
Hmm.
worth 5 million, and I
Hmm.
sell it.
Yep.
I should have $4 million of gain. Forget about those
Right.
depreciation deductions. We'll ignore that for the time being.
Right.
I have
Right.
$4
Right.
million dollars of gain. I
Yeah.
sell the building, but if I buy another building
Uh-huh.
within 180 days and I jump through all the hoops, and they're not hard
Right.
to jump through.
They're
The
not hard
title
hoops.
company can't
Right.
help you
I've
with it.
jumped through them.
Yeah, you've jumped through them. Then
Yeah.
then I basically that $4 million of gain is built into that new building. And let's say I
Yes.
paid 10 million for the new building, and
Hmm.
because I have a lot of cash to invest at this point, my
Right.
first buildings made me a lot of
Yeah.
money, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
now I invest in this $10 million building because I can borrow, for every dollar
Mm.
of cash I put in, I can probably borrow three, right?
Yep. About three. Yep. Sometimes
And
four, depending on your bank.
yeah,
How
sometimes
far they'll
four.
let you run out. Yep.
And then that building over the course of the next decade increases in value to 25 million. And
Right.
then I can do another exchange.
Yeah.
You can map out where a savvy real estate person
Hmm.
could, over the course of a career, turn $1 million into 1 billion and never pay tax on any of it.
Yep.
And then when these people finally die, those gains, those untaxed gains,
Yeah, get
That,
erased.
they just vanish for tax purposes.
That part is
You buy your
crazy.
Amazon stock for 1 million. It's worth 20 million when you die. You leave it to your kids. They're
Mhm.
treated as if they paid
As
20
if they
million
just
dollars
bought
for
it for $20 million.
it. Yeah.
Right, it's crazy. Yeah, that is absolutely berserk, and to me, that would be one of the simplest things to change, and I think that changing that could potentially have an upstream effect where, for example, if I know that I can't leave these houses to my kids and have that basis reset that we're talking about, I might sell them and go ahead and pay the taxes so I can use that money. Um, so I wonder if we just changed the reset part where you can't reset it, would that potentially work, or do we need to chase after the as they come tax?
No, you have to go
Okay.
back to the whole thing.
Okay.
Changing the what you're calling the reset part, the term in
Yeah.
the tax world is something called stepped up basis. Uh,
Yeah.
if you solve that, that would solve a little bit of the problem. But
Uh-huh.
going back to the Jeff Bezos example,
Right.
if he sold his Amazon stock tomorrow, he
Mhm.
would pay tax. But
Right.
when you do the math and you compare what he'd pay in tax now and what he'd be left with to what would he would have to pay on an annual basis on the
Mhm.
gains every year.
Oh,
He was
yeah.
taxed on an annual basis
Uh-huh.
and had to sell enough shares to pay the tax.
Mhm.
The the equivalent of this 23.8% tax on sale now would
Uh-huh.
be a tax rate of under 3% per year. That would be his
Uh-huh.
effective annual tax rate, just
Yeah.
3% per year.
Yeah.
Some guy out there making 40 grand pays more than
It's
3%.
more than that.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, so
Exactly.
no, we have to deal with the gains as they're occurring for the
Mhm.
folks at the very top. Again,
Yeah.
we can deal with with ordinary folks by allowing everyone to have the first X million dollars of gains taxed only when they sell.
That sounds great.
But when we
Right,
get to
because
the
then it
billionaire
only
class,
affects the people who are
yeah,
really have
yeah.
who are really accumulating dangerous amounts of wealth.
Right. When we get to the billionaire class, no, we've got to address that. And then, and by the way, if you tax the gains as they're occurring, we don't have to worry about these depreciation rules. We don't have to
Right.
worry about the like-kind exchange rules
Mhm.
because those gains are
You've already
showing
paid it.
up on their balance sheet.
That shows up already, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And have Patriotic Millionaires done any math on what this would mean? If we did this one thing, closed this one loophole, and caused taxation to happen in real time as it should on investments, just like it does on income. I don't get to make 200 grand this year and pay taxes on it 20 years from now. So why should it be any different with investment gain? I agree with that. So if we do that, if we close that, how powerful is that? With those limitations, say we do a 5 million a lifetime limitation, which is a lot. If you can gain $5 million and not pay taxes on it, that's a pretty sweet deal. So let's say we cut it even that low. About how much would that give us?
And then we went ahead and taxed the Jeff Bezoses of the world
Exactly.
annually.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, they'd still be really rich, Chris.
Oh, they'd be super rich.
I
But
mean,
my question is, how much does that give us to circle back into those people making 40 grand a year?
it would be more than enough to handle the
More than
folks making
enough.
40
That's my
grand a year.
thought. Okay, now and that's what I wanted to
That
verify because
that part would be a piece of cake. That
okay,
part.
that's my hope is that that
Yeah.
one change could make that big of a difference. That's
But
huge. That's
but
really
but
helpful.
but just as important to that is if we can tax these folks at the top enough,
Mhm.
won't have this incredible obscene concentration of wealth
Yes. That's the next thing I wanted to get
wealth
into.
is being translated into power. Look,
Power.
at some point, and it's a lot less than these folks have now, at some point, wealth loses any significance for the goods and services it buys, and it's only important for the power it buys. And
Yeah.
we saw that absolutely in this last election where Elon Musk put $200 million into Trump's campaign.
Which is nothing to him.
It's nothing to him exactly.
Nothing.
It's less than 1/1000th of his wealth. But at the same time, it was enough to overwhelm the campaign finance system, and he
Mhm.
wasn't the only one. The
Yeah.
Adelson family was over 100 million.
Wow.
Timothy Mellon was over 100 million, and most
Wow.
of them are lining up on one side politically. But even if they split, even if it was for every dollar that was going to one part,
Right.
another dollar was going
Right.
to the other,
It still
it's still
drowns out the voices of regular people.
it's still and look, there's a place there's an overlap where really rich Democrats and really rich Republicans agree, and that's on tax policy. So
Hmm.
we
Yep.
never get tax policy fixed if they're in control.
Yes. Yes. And that's the problem. And I'm already running into that. I'm already on the phone with potential donors and they ask me about taxes and I tell them honestly what I want to do. And they're like, they get kind of quiet. And I don't get those multi-thousand-dollar donations from those people, which I need. So I'm already seeing it, even at the level I'm doing it, even at the small scale, I'm already seeing the resistance. But with that said, I'd rather speak honestly about this issue and propose something that's good for America and lose than propose to continue this bad system and win and thus be obligated to continue this bad system, which is one of the big reasons I ran to fix it.
Well, this gets to the purpose, the mission of our organization, the Patriotic Millionaires.
Right.
We're wealthy Americans who believe that it's critical to the sustainability of our democracy that the rich pay a lot more in tax.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the purpose for the name Patriotic Millionaires.
Yeah.
Well, there's a whole bunch of other rich people who don't agree with us. And for purposes of contrast, we can call them the unpatriotic millionaires.
Like that. I can try with that.
The unpatriotic millionaires dramatically outnumber the patriotic millionaires,
They do. I
unfortunately.
have noticed that. They do.
Now we don't really believe they're unpatriotic, but we're just
Right. But
we're just
it's a
using
good
that
label.
to draw
It's
the
a good label.
contrast.
Yeah, it's a good label. Yeah, it works. It works. Yeah, I don't want to cast aspersions, but there are things that are true. There are people who have an incredible amount of money and could do a wonderful amount of good with it and aren't. And for those people, I don't have respect for their wealth, for their power.
Well, and you're kind of getting close to another argument that's made that, well, we shouldn't be taxing them because they're so philanthropic. They give so much to charity.
Hmm.
Truth is, they don't give that much to charity. If you compare what they give as a portion of their wealth
Yeah,
compared to just ordinary people, what they give
right.
as a portion of theirs, when they give to charity, they give to the charities they want to give to. And so
Hmm.
they're deciding what's going to happen with this tremendous amount of wealth that if it were paid in taxes, the
The
society
people would
decide.
decide, right?
People
The
would
representatives, the people would
indirectly
decide.
through their elected representatives
Right.
would be deciding how that money was best spent.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, and I think you're right that the people who really are accumulating these phenomenal amounts of wealth, they're not philanthropic by nature because
And by the
they
way,
wouldn't have that. They wouldn't have that wealth.
if you make some big philanthropic contribution
Uh-huh.
and all of a sudden your name is on a big building, it's really not 100%
It's
charitable, is it?
exactly. There's that too. Right. And this is another thing that I was hoping you'd mention that a lot of these donations are actually quite strategic.
Exactly. They call it reputation laundering.
Exactly, exactly. And I don't want to cast aspersions on wealthy people in general. There are a lot of really wealthy people who make meaningful contributions and really make good changes for the world. But I think you're right that percentage wise, it's the working class that's really grinding and really making it work for these charities.
Right, right. When a member of the so-called working class who's making maybe 60,000 or $70,000 a year
Hmm.
contributes, $400 or $500, that actually they feel that contribution a lot
Yes,
more than the billionaire who writes a check for 1 million.
right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I found myself in 2019 because I paid so little taxes. I was able to donate $140,000 to my favorite charity, CamFed, which educates South African women, helps empower them, helps make their whole societies better. Um, but when I talk to the organizers at CamFed, they're not a lot of people giving them that much money. And there's a lot of people who could give them 10 times that easily. And I look at this organization that's so powerful for world good. And I look at similar organizations working within the United States, which I've also donated to in large amounts in years that I've had it. And I see that pattern that you're right. It's people of pretty modest means who are really working to give that money.
Right. You know, if you compare what they're getting in donations to, say, the endowment fund of a major university,
Hmm.
and it's, I guess, a worthy contribution to the
Yeah,
endowment fund of a major university,
right.
but it's typically that donor's alma mater. Um,
Hmm.
they want the school to succeed, and a lot of times that those endowment funds just sit there for, decades on end,
Uh,
and they may throw off income, some of which is used, but
uh-huh.
is it real philanthropy? Uh,
Hmm.
it,
Yeah.
and you compare a lot of these billionaire donors, what
Hmm.
where they're making their contributions, to someone like Mackenzie Scott, Jeff Bezos's ex-wife,
Hmm.
who actually looks for charities where they're doing a lot on the ground,
Uh-huh.
not the endowment funds of the major universities, not
Yeah.
the art museums where
Uh-huh.
someone's name is going to go on a plaque.
Hmm.
And the
Yeah, yeah.
contrast between her pattern of giving and
Uh,
other billionaires' pattern of giving, it's a
uh,
stark contrast.
oh, it's good to see those exceptions then. Yeah. And my other thought is, and I'm sure that you and others from Patriotic Millionaires have thought of this, is that if we are fairly taxing some of these millionaires, billionaires, making it harder for them to accumulate wealth, they're going to give away more money. They're going to hit the charities harder and say, hey, I can either pay. And I've had years where I've done the same thing where I'm like, man, I can pay a really high end, pay a 40% back when it was 40%, maybe 40% tax rate on this top 100,000 of my income. Or I can realize I don't need that money. I can give it away and not pay it. And I think if we can tax millionaires, billionaires properly, we're going to encourage more of that kind of contribution.
Oh, I think that's right. If they're actually,
They're
if there's
actually paying
more
taxes.
income, that's if it's going to be recognized, that
Yeah.
there's more of a value from a charitable deduction to be income.
Yes. Absolutely. So I think that could be a helpful thing. I mean, you're right that they might not give to the charities that are most powerful for really helping the people who need it most, but I still think that in general it could be a helpful push.
I don't want a society, though, that depends on the philanthropy of billionaires.
Amen to that.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, we're one of the wealthiest nations in the world. We can afford to take care of our people.
exactly.
You
Exactly.
know, we don't need people dying of preventable illness and starvation. That's not America. Not something that should be happening here. Yeah. Any other thoughts you have on the specifics of changes, or we can get into a little bit of how we sell this because this is hard. There's this whole idea of trickle down economics being good, and you got to let the billionaires be rich so they can keep being billionaires and doing their billionaire stuff that makes the economy work. And then there's of course 40 in economics that says, hey, the strong middle class is actually what supports those billionaires.
Yeah, we're being told that the wealth is trickling down when the reality is that it's gushing
It is
up.
not. It is gushing up. Absolutely. And people, if somebody's running a business, unless they are truly altruistic, they're going to pay their workers however much they need to pay them to keep them showing up and working. And that's it. Doesn't matter how many billions of dollars they're making. If they can pay somebody 18 bucks an hour to show up and work, that's what they're going to pay
And they're going to pay as few workers as they can.
them. Mm-hmm. Yep, that too.
They may be creating jobs against their own intentions, but their goal is to have as few workers as needed, not
Right.
more than needed.
Yeah.
So, and what really creates jobs? Consumer demand. You
Yeah.
People have larger incomes and they're out buying
Hmm.
goods and services, and we need people working to satisfy the demand for those goods and services. So
Right.
you want to create jobs, pay the people.
Yeah. And that brings us a great segue into the minimum wage discussion.
Right.
Where correct me if I'm wrong here, but Patriotic Millionaires wants to double the minimum wage. This is another,
I
no?
think we want to do more than double the federal minimum wage. The federal
Okay.
minimum wage is at 7.25 an hour.
Okay.
And maybe a decade or so ago, getting to $15 an hour would have
Mm,
been would have,
okay. Yeah.
gotten folks close to the cost of living in most
Right.
places,
Yeah.
but it's no longer enough. So we want people to make as an income the basic cost of living. Uh,
Hmm.
and if we can do that on a regional basis, if we can figure out how,
Hmm.
that's fine.
Right.
If it only takes $40,000 in West Virginia and it takes
Hmm.
60,000 in New York City, so be it. But
Right.
but some way or another, we need to have a wage system that works where a worker makes enough money to pay their basic living expenses.
Yeah.
If you go to a resource like, say, the MIT Living Wage Calculator, you can
Uh-huh.
look up county by county in the country
Oh,
what it
okay.
costs to live. And what
Okay.
you find, if you go to North Carolina, you'll find that North Carolina is very close to the middle. A year or two ago,
Okay.
it was exactly the middle. But
Okay.
North Carolina is very close to the middle. Um, and it depends on which county. The counties that are in the Charlotte area and the Raleigh-Durham area are more expensive than the ones that are, rural
Of
counties.
course. Yeah.
Um,
And
but
Asheville's exponentially more expensive than two counties over 50 miles away.
Yeah, and so, in the least expensive counties, it might take $38,000 a year to live
Hmm.
in North
Yeah.
Carolina. In the more expensive ones, it might be more like 50,000, but it's
Hmm.
right in that ballpark,
Yeah.
that 40 to 45,000 dollar
Hmm.
range is where
Yeah.
that's how much it costs to live in most locations in America these days.
And the median family household income in North Carolina is 62.
Well, I'm talking about what it costs to live for just a single person with no kids.
Exactly.
And I think that in fairness to employers, that's what the minimum wage has to be geared to. You want to get married, you want to have kids, that's
Right.
great, but
Yeah.
that's not your employer's responsibility. That's your
Mhm.
responsibility
That
to
makes
go out
sense. That makes sense.
and make the extra income for that
Yeah.
purpose. But at least a single person with no kids should have their basic living expenses
Yeah.
covered by their,
Right.
by
By
their
working.
compensation.
Yeah. Um, how about let's kind of anticipate some objections to raising the minimum wage. A couple I can think of are there are people who just don't really have skills, don't really have the ability to be that productive and make money. With a higher minimum wage, it might be much harder for them to find jobs they can work. The other thing with a higher minimum wage is that it might push companies to automate, to use AI more, and push people out of positions they were in. Um, and these are just kind of ideas that I have, but anytime I present something, I try to imagine what's the objection, who's going to poke holes in this idea, and how do we deal with that? So do you have any thoughts on that of kind of how we bring this in as far as the timing, the structure of it to try to prevent either of those things from happening?
Well, let's go to the automation question first, because
Okay.
that, I think, uh, folks just aren't thinking hard enough about that one. First of all, on the tax side, we should at least have an even playing field. But let's say that you could buy a machine that will do the work of one worker for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And if you finance the cost of that machine,
Mm-hmm.
so that you pay for it over 5 years, you pay the exact same amount per year as you would pay a worker working
Mm-hmm.
for those 5 years. So economically, it's a coin flip. Which one's better, right? You with me
Uh-huh.
so far?
If you're looking at it from that very simple basis.
Yeah. Now, tax-wise, though, if you pay the worker over 5 years, you only get a deduction from your income as an employer each year when you pay the worker. But
Mm-hmm.
if you buy the machine and you finance the cost of it, virtually 100% of that cost is deducted in the first year. So tax-wise, we incentivize the employer to choose the machine over
uh,
the worker. I
that is a
think
very good point.
now,
Okay.
in my mind, the playing field should be even.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be tilted in favor of automation.
Favor of replacing a human with automation. Absolutely.
But let's go to the more fundamental point,
Yeah.
where folks are saying, well, if we pay workers the basic cost of living, it could cause employers to use automation, and then they won't have jobs at all. And underlying this is this premise that the benefits of automation should only go to the owners of capital. And that's
Mm-hmm.
nonsense. When
Mm-hmm.
as society moves forward, automation will take over. We could get to the point 50 years from now where, with folks working 2 or 3 hours per week, we
Mm-hmm.
satisfy the work requirements
Yeah.
of society, and
I like
everything
where you're going with
else is
this.
done by machines.
Uh-huh.
But are we going to share the benefits of those? Are we going to share that prosperity? Or
Yes.
are the owners of capital just going to have more and more and more
I,
wealth? And
I
I think
think
the
that's the
answer is it
key.
has to be shared prosperity, which
Yes.
means that when automation happens, and automation will happen, and we go from needing an average of 40 hours per week per worker to 30 hours per week per worker,
Mm-hmm.
then the work week should be reduced from 40 hours to 30 hours, but the compensation for those 30 hours should be what it was
It
uh,
should,
when,
because the
they
productivity
were working
is.
40 hours.
Yeah,
And that way, we'll be sharing the benefits of the automation.
exactly.
That's the way it has to work, because automation should be a good thing. We all
It
should be rooting for it.
exactly right.
We shouldn't be
Make our
fearing it.
lives easier, give
Crazy.
us more leisure time. Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally agree. It's a tough sell, but you're absolutely right that automation does make our lives easier. There's a reason we keep doing this. It makes our work week shorter. It makes us able to afford more things. And I think with that, that we would have to just be really careful with raising a minimum wage, and with that potential. I really like your idea of evening up the score on the tax code and not having the taxes encourage people through depreciation to hire a machine, so to speak, instead of a human. But I think we also really need to get people kind of focused on that overall productivity and make sure that we are spreading that around.
And by the way, Chris, we also, along with the minimum wage, we should be looking at where that hour threshold is for overtime.
Hmm.
40 hours is probably antiquated. It hasn't budged in 30 or
Uh-huh.
40 years. And we
Yeah.
should be looking at what the premium is for overtime work. Because what we want is, if we have enough work to keep people busy 30 hours per week, the overtime laws should make it really stupid for employers to have people working overtime, so that
Hmm.
we have,
That makes sense.
everyone working their 30 hours and getting paid
Right.
for
And then it pushes employers more into sharing that benefit, that lifestyle benefit, because
it.
there's a
Right.
huge difference between working 30 and 40 hours a week. I mean, I've gone from, for me, it's more like going from 70 to 50, but that incremental decrease in hours makes a huge difference in quality
Oh,
of life.
Chris, I mean, if we could just get to a 32-hour week where it's a
Hmm.
4-day week, the
Yeah,
sense of well-being that people would
yeah,
have if they
for
had
sure.
3-day weekends, oh my, it
And
would
then
just
you think about what it would do
life
for
so
the
much better
economy.
for everybody. And
Think about what it would do for tourism, for the economy, for travel, for art,
oh yeah,
music. Would all kick up.
and all the studies are that you don't lose any productivity, that when you treat
Hmm.
people that way, they'll produce as much in the 32
Right.
hours
They'll
as they're
bust it for those
producing now in
32
40.
hours. Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I think just to circle back to kind of the automation question, I think that in this overall grand policy that we could have retraining, we could have re-education, we could give opportunities for the specific individuals who are negatively affected by automation by a higher minimum wage to say, oh, okay, your employer can't afford to pay you $16, $18 an hour to do this job you've been doing. Let's teach you how to do the job that your employer can pay you that to do.
Right, right. And look, we need a safety net for those folks.
Exactly. Because
Someone.
people are going to get displaced, whether our policies do it or not. Automation is going to displace people. We're
And if
going to
you
have
know
to
if
have.
if if you look at the unemployment compensation
Hmm.
guidelines, and how much someone makes when they're unemployed and how long those unemployment benefits last,
Hmm.
they're completely inadequate. We
Uh,
had to change them temporarily during COVID because it was so clear how inadequate they were.
hmm.
Uh, but we're the richest society in the history of the planet. We can afford to have a safety net under
Yeah,
everybody.
absolutely. And with that said, our current safety net at times discourages people from working. I've talked to quite a few friends who, if they took a job they were offered, then taking that job would pull all their benefits. would pull their Head Start access, their child care access, their Medicaid access, all these things they need to raise that child as a single mom. And these are the ones in particular who are negatively affected by this. I would propose instead a sliding scale where, let's say you're getting X amount of benefits and you get a job that's paying you 16 bucks an hour, 10, 15 hours a week. You take that job, you make that money, and you pay a little bit of that into your benefits. You don't lose them. And
Right.
it's just one
You
of
know,
those places where we're kind of leaving people out in the cold, where we're discouraging people to work with the policies and with how rigid some of them are.
I mean, the economic term for that is a cliff. And
Yeah,
to make it easy for folks to understand, if it were in the tax world, it would be where your tax rate is 0 up to 40%. And then the next dollar of income over that, you pay 130% of it. So you're actually
right.
losing money by making
Losing
more.
money by working.
Yeah.
Yes, that's it. That's it. See, I'd love to fix that, and it seems like that would have broad bipartisan support because it seems to me that Republicans, conservatives are more objectionable to a handout, to giving something to someone. And so I would think they would be all on board with fixing that system to where people are encouraged to work and are allowed to work and keep the benefits of that work.
They used to be on board with that a long time ago.
Huh.
They had a proposal for something called a negative income tax, where if you made 0, you would get a refund of let's say it was $15,000, right?
Uh-huh.
And then you wouldn't need all these other benefits because back then
Ah,
$15,000 would buy a lot of stuff, right?
right.
And then the more you make, that refund would be less and less and less, and then at some point you
Yeah,
actually would start paying tax.
right.
But it would you'd never have the disincentive to work because you could
Yes.
always keep most of it.
Yeah. I wonder what happened to that idea because it does seem like something that would flourish across both sides. I guess we're just too busy yapping at each other's throats and being mad at each other about culture wars to go into something as simple and
Well, if you
bipartisan as
remember
that idea.
back in 2020, Andrew Yang tried to bring it back
I
because
remember that.
his concept was the universal basic income, but in
Yeah.
substance, it's basically the same thing as the negative income tax,
Right. Right.
and it was very popular. People
Yeah.
liked that.
Yeah. Yeah. It would be nice to bring back something like that, especially if we do it in exchange for some of the complex benefits. So we say, hey, we're not actually going to give people more money. We're going to change the way we give it to where it's much simpler. They're not having to fill out all these forms and go through these registrations. We don't have all this bureaucracy that we have to pay to maintain it. Makes things more efficient and makes that money go further.
Being poor is a full-time job. There's a
It
lot
sounds
of work
like it.
to filling
Yeah.
out forms and stuff like
Right.
that. It really is.
Yes.
And it really just it destroys their productivity because there's just so much time is consumed dealing
Mhm.
with satisfying these various requirements for all these different
Mhm.
benefits.
Yeah. And that's getting worse. As we cut staff, as we increase requirements, it's getting worse. And I understand the purpose of it that you don't want somebody who's able bodied to not work. But why not just use simple market economics to do that?
Well,
Why not
Chris,
just reward people for working?
look how cynical it is in this last go round with this tax and budget bill that the Republicans just passed.
Mhm.
They increased the paperwork requirements for Medicaid, where on the surface, when you look at it, people shouldn't lose their Medicaid benefits. They'll just have to, fill out paperwork more often.
Mhm.
But they did it with the full knowledge and where the folks estimating the budgetary impact took it into
Mhm.
account that people would drop would
Yep.
lose their Medicaid benefits because they just simply couldn't keep up with all the paperwork. That's how
Mhm.
cynical it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And then cutting the staff to where if they get a technical issue and they have to call and get on hold to fix it, they're on hold for 2 hours and not fixing the problem instead of on
Right.
hold for 40 minutes and fixing it. And I think it just seems like the evil corporation thing where like, oh yeah, cancel at any time, and then you're on the phone with for an hour trying to cancel the service they're charging you 18 bucks a month for that you didn't even need. It just seems like that kind of just shisty thing, and that's not America. That's not what we do. Let's be honest about things here. And I don't know. I feel like I'm not seeing a lot of that. Like when I get Chuck Edwards' emails, he talks about how great all these things are and how great the big ugly bill is and all these things he's doing. I'm like, I know better than that, but I bet most of the people who are reading this don't. They
Well,
can't see through that.
what's so tragic is the benefits, the tax benefit that they gave to the people at the very, very top. It's practically meaningless to them.
Yeah,
It,
right.
for them, it's nothing.
Oh, I can buy another helicopter this year. Great.
It's like 4 or 5 days 4 or 5 days growth in a year of their wealth for the folks at the
Yeah.
very top.
Yeah.
But for the folks at the bottom, it's whether or not they have health care. And
Right.
and they looked at that trade-off and they said, no, we're gonna help the guy at the top.
Yeah. Yeah. So jacked up. And it's to me, it's almost like a return to feudalism that they want these extremes to keep going. That, and even some of Trump's rhetoric kind of plays into this as kind of this Gilded Age, this upper class, this like let's measure society by that top 1% and what they do, and not by everybody else and the real people who are living day to day. And it's kind of terrifying, I'll tell you the truth. Like the combination of the money and power and the widening wealth and power gap, it's what prompted me to run. That as well as
Good for
the
you.
opinion. Thank you. That as well as the impingements on free speech. Those three things together, and they go together for me. Like the reason they're trying to fight free speech is because they don't want this coming out in the open. They don't want how bad this is to be in their face next time there's an election. So that's what I'm after, is to fix that. And
Well,
it obviously won't be just me, but I'm one of a lot of people doing the same thing in different districts and trying to flip them and get things moving in the right direction.
well, go for it.
Yeah, I will. I will. And yeah, let's keep in touch. I'll be sending you some more specific questions as I kind of refine this policy. But I really like that there's one big thing we can change that we can use to relieve the tax burden on the lower and middle classes. That's really what I'm after, is something that is simple enough that I can get up on a microphone and say, hey, here's what we're going to do. This is how we're going to lower your taxes, and people can understand it. And that's understandable. So yeah, I appreciate that.